Good morning, all. Welcome to this webinar live stream to this BDC launch event. My name is Doug Mork. I am the Executive Director of the Building Dignity and Respect Standards Council, or BDC for short, as well as one of the pastors here at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in South Minneapolis. Thanks for joining us for our virtual launch this morning, and a special thanks to so many of you whose work led to this day. We're here this morning to tell you about BDC and to share at least part of the story of how we got here and why this matters. We're here to share our vision that all workers deserve dignity and respect, and to issue a call to Twin Cities developers and building finance to join us in raising the standards for all construction in our communities. We're here because as we consider what the murder of George Floyd, the uprising, and now the early conversations around rebuilding mean for our communities, we are committed to not repeating old mistakes. And more than anything, we're here because we're following the courage and leadership of workers. Workers who have said no to wage theft and labor trafficking. Workers who have challenged harassment and unsafe conditions. Workers who have organized and built power and strategized together on how to transform this industry. We begin with their stories, naming for us how this system is broken. Merle Payne, co-director of CETUL, will provide a little introduction to some video testimony.
Good morning. My name is Merle Payne. I'm the co-director of CETUL. We are going to show a couple of videos that provide some context about what is happening in the construction industry in the Twin Cities metro area. But I first wanted to give a little bit of context about some background about it. So CETUL has been around for about 13 years. And we have always had a large base of construction workers who have come into the organization. And what we have heard from construction workers is there are kind of two realities in construction. One is where there are a large union presence and good working conditions and good middle-class jobs. And the other is non-union sector, where we hear from workers who tell us that they expect 1 out of every 4 jobs won't pay them their full wages. That's the norm in the industry. And what other job can you imagine? It's okay to assume that you get 75% of your pay. This is the norm in the industry. At the extreme, we have also seen labor trafficking happening in the industry. So this is the context where workers have begun to stand up, learn about their rights, and start building a structure to transform that industry and provide basic dignity and respect for all workers in the industry. So I'd like to pass it to watch a few videos from workers' perspective about what they are seeing in the industry.
Sorry, I'll just technical difficulties for 1 second.
Eustaquio Orozco y soy organizador de construcción en CETUL. Después de 14 años de experiencia en la industria de construcción, estoy aquí como organizador y me he dado cuenta de la gran problemática que tenemos en la industria con el robo de salario y misclasificación. Entonces ahora estamos implementando este nuevo programa BDC que viene para tratar de solucionar todos estos problemas que tenemos en la industria. Gente quejándose de maltrato en el trabajo, de robo de salario, de que no le pagan lo justo. Entonces, esperamos que BDC venga a apoyar a todos estos trabajadores y que sea un apoyo no solamente para trabajadores, sino también para las empresas, para evitar esto. Esperamos la cooperación de desarrolladores y trabajadores, sobre todo, porque, como dije, esperamos solucionar los problemas que hay en la industria de la construcción para una mejor vida de los trabajadores en el estado de Minnesota. Gracias.
Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Abel Sandoval. Pues aquí nomás les quería comentar un poco de lo que he pasado yo. Yo soy trabajador de construcción, todo tipo de construcción. Tengo de 16 a 17 años de experiencia. Pues estaba hablando por lo que está pasando de robo de salario. Y pues quería decirles que hay que apoyarnos todos. Hay un nuevo sistema que se llama BDC. Es una nueva organización que se están juntando varios, tanto como Unión como CETUL, para hacer esto más fuerte, para que toda la gente y todos los trabajadores, tanto construcción, limpieza, todos, tengamos un apoyo de pedir el salario, lo que deberíamos de ganar. No dejarnos seguir estafando por otras personas que quieran hacerse millonarios con el trabajo de uno.
Many problematic developers are not commonly known, but there are some bigger names in the industry, such as the Wilf family, the owners of the Minnesota Vikings. The Wilf family has started doing some local housing development projects, like the Vikings Lake project, high-end apartments right next to the Vikings practice facility in Eagan. There are at least 2 contractors on this job site with a history of disturbing reports of workers' rights violations. The first is Absolute Drywall. The United States Department of Labor recently found that Absolute Drywall cheated workers out of over $126,000 in unpaid wages. A separate federal investigation into Absolute Drywall found a child labor violation. The second contractor working on the Viking Lakes project is J.L. Schweiters. A few years ago, 2 black employees of J.L. Schweiters filed a complaint with the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. According to the workers, a white supervisor repeatedly threatened them, telling them that he had a gun and that he could shoot an N-word from a mile away, and he made a noose out of electrical wire. We expect leaders in our community, such as the Wilf family, owners of the Minnesota Vikings, to contribute to the common good by using responsible contractors on their projects. It is disappointing to see that they are instead supporting contractors with problematic reports of violations, from threats of shooting black people to wage theft to child labor.
With rebuilding efforts after the George Floyd uprising, we have an opportunity to reimagine development in a way that does not replicate the same structures and practices that led to the condition we find ourselves and to the uprising. One way to do this is to ensure basic respect and dignity for the workers involved in rebuilding. I turn to a video with Carlos.
My name is Carlos Garcia Velasco. I'm the lead organizer with the construction campaign at CETUL, Centro de Trabajadores Unidos en la Lucha. I'm here on location at Lake Street. We got a call about a month ago about some workers that were on site here between the Target and Cub on Lake Street. And when we arrived, we saw union jobs on the left, union jobs on the right, and we saw what we suspected as workers that were being exploited. We were able to confirm that they were from Central America and Mexico, and they were up here by way of Texas, and they were being paid below the minimum wage that was created here in Minneapolis. On my way here, we saw images of people in lines on both sides of Lake Street that had basic needs, food, water, diapers, formula for their families, and could use the opportunity to earn a wage with dignity. But this is the importance of why the code of conduct and the BDC is very important. If we don't have rules and they're not solutions driven by workers and we don't have enforcement, this exploitation will continue to happen even in the rebuild.
In addition to some of the wage and structural challenges, non-union construction work faces incredibly dangerous working conditions. We're going to pass the mic to Satul to talk about problems with safety standards in the industry.
So thank you for being here. Today we would like to talk about, we built this ofrenda at Seitul, and we just wanted to invite you all to be here with us and a couple of workers. There are many fatalities in construction in America every year. Latinx workers make up about 29% of the workforce, yet they account for about 39% of fatal falls. And recently here in our area, we had 2 fatalities. One was from a 26-year-old young person who fell, but there have been 2 recent deaths here. And we've been impacted in our community in construction workers are all, it's like a family. And when something like this happens in the community, everybody is impacted. So what we'd really like to do is just invite everyone here at this important meeting to join us in a minute of silence to acknowledge the loss of life, which is a reality. We think of construction and we think of exploitation and we think of things being built, but we don't think of the real cost, the sweat, the time, the lost wages, and sometimes the loss of life. So please join us now in a moment, in a minute of silence for these recent fatalities in the construction industry.
Morning, everybody.
Thank you. Now I would like to welcome Judge Laura Safer-Espinosa to tell us about the power of the WSR model to change workers' lives and transform a broken industry. Judge Safer-Espinosa is the Executive Director of the Fair Food Standards Council, which monitors and enforces the Coalition of Immokalee Workers' groundbreaking agreements with growers and food retail buyers to ensure fundamental human rights for agriculture workers. The Fair Food Program has been recognized by the White House, the United Nations, Harvard Business Review, the New York Times, CNN International's Freedom Project, and numerous international human rights organizations as one of the most powerful programs in the world today to uncover, eliminate, and prevent modern slavery, sexual violence, wage theft, and other systemic abuses. Judge Safer-Espinosa is a former New York State Supreme Court justice who served as a judge and court administrator for 20 years. She helped to design and became the first presiding judge of an innovative alternative to incarceration court for nonviolent offenders. Judge Safer-Espinosa has an extensive history of work with government, human rights, and legal organizations in the United States and Latin America. She has also taught extensively in Latin America in support of law reform and greater transparency. Judge Laura, thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, everyone. And very happy to be with you this morning and to convey congratulations from all of your colleagues at the Fair Food Standards Council As Reverend Moore just explained, we are the organization dedicated to monitoring and enforcing the Fair Food Program's Code of Conduct for thousands of agricultural workers in 7 states. As monitors of the first worker-driven social responsibility program in the United States, since 2011, we have seen firsthand the transformational power of the model it represents. It is the same model now being implemented by workers, employers, and corporations at the top of supply and production chains in multiple industries on 3 continents. And it is the model that you will soon be adapting to protect the human rights of the most vulnerable workers in the construction industry. For a little context on why we are so inspired by what you are doing here today, the birthplace of the Fair Food Program in Immokalee, Florida, was once known to federal prosecutors as ground zero for modern-day slavery. Excluded from most labor legislation, including the right to collective bargaining, farm workers were subjected to systemic wage theft, violence, including rampant sexual assault, and serious health and safety violations. This was the situation confronting the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, the founders of the Fair Food Program, when they began to organize. And while the coalition received a presidential medal for its extraordinary efforts to combat modern-day slavery, they also understood that beyond prosecutions, workers needed the abuses to stop happening in the first place. By going to the top of the supply chain for a very different kind of enforcement power in the form of legally binding agreements that required market consequences for violations of workers' fundamental human rights, they were able to build a program in which those abuses were not only effectively detected and eliminated, but ultimately prevented. And different from traditional corporate social responsibility programs that merely seek to solve a momentary public relations crises, the workers who fought to create the Fair Food Program wanted to make sure that it actually worked on the ground. So to that end, they put a unique set of mechanisms in place, mechanisms whose effectiveness have widely been recognized by observers ranging from the UN Business and Human Rights Working Group and the Special Rapporteur on Human Trafficking to the New York Times editorial board, the MacArthur Fellowship, the White House Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Initiatives, and the US State Department under previous administrations, numerous researchers and human rights organizations, but most importantly, by the tens of thousands of workers whose work environments have been dramatically transformed. As a result of the work done by CETUL and other labor and community allies, the Building Dignity and Respect Standards Council will become the 3rd US organization to monitor and oversee similar mechanisms. The elements we share and that will propel the Building Dignity and Respects program's success will be standards generated not by outside experts, but rather based on the experience and priorities of workers themselves. Education for workers on their rights and responsibilities under the program that prepares them to be the frontline monitors of their own rights in their interactions in the workplace, as well as with the program's dedicated monitoring organization. Monitoring by the council, whose staff will carry out in-depth on-site audits that ensure workers' confidentiality and their ability to speak freely in their preferred languages, as well as financial audits to confirm that they are properly compensated. The same investigators will respond to a worker complaint hotline in a streamlined, efficient process that is accessible to workers and collaborative with participating employers. The council will investigate code violations and oversee corrective actions. And critically, most critically, behind the standards and workers' voices when credible complaints are raised will be the prompt and effective market consequences imposed by developers at the top of the subcontracting supply chain. In a few short years, through thousands of prompt resolutions to worker complaints and audit findings in the Fair Food Program, Forced labor and other entrenched systemic abuses have been eliminated, and the worst practices and actors have been weeded out. As someone who presided in a courtroom for 20 years, I know that those transformations came at relative lightning speed, and that the program's protections against retaliation continue to motivate workers to make their voices heard. We also know that our friends and colleagues at the Milk with Dignity Standards Council have experienced a very similar trajectory during their now 3 years of monitoring and enforcement in the Vermont dairy industry. In the same way, the Building Dignity and Respect program will create a win-win-win situation. Developers at the top of the subcontracting chain will have true transparency into employment practices on the projects they are responsible for, and the elimination of risk at a time of heightened public concern for essential and vulnerable workers. Contractors will become employers of choice, reducing turnover, preventing risk, improving management systems, and obtaining verification of ethical labor practices. Your work on the front lines of the struggle for economic and racial justice, including protecting worker health and safety in the face of the increased dangers presented by COVID-19, has never been more critical. Please count on the Fair Food Standards Council to support your work in any and all ways possible.
Thanks, Judge Laura, for being here, for your remarks now, and most of all, for your continuing wisdom and support. Always just a quick phone call away as we've been doing this work to build BDC. The cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul are key drivers in development and construction in the metropolitan area. Thankfully, these cities are also fortunate enough to have mayors who recognize the importance of workers' rights and the dignity of work. Whether working against wage theft or helping raise minimum wage to livable levels, Mayors Jacob Fry, speaking next, and Melvin Carter a little later, have recognized the important role cities can play in advocating for and protecting workers. Mayor Fry worked as an employment, business litigation, and civil rights attorney before being elected to the City Council to represent the 3rd Ward in 2013. His focus on affordable housing carried over into a key priority as mayor when he was elected in 2017. Mayor Fry, thanks for joining us and for being with us this morning. I turn to you.
Well, Reverend Doug Mork, thank you so much, not just for having me today, but for all of your efforts on this particular initiative. A big thank you to Seytul and Veronica, I see Merle there, for inviting me here today. Thank you to our labor allies, Dan. This is the kind of partnership that is perhaps long overdue, but the fact that it is being organized, the fact that we're coming together around this really critical issue, I think it carries great weight. And I'm so proud of the work that Minneapolis has already done, in passing wage theft ordinance and in our co-enforcement relationship with other organizations like Seytul to really center the voices of workers, because we know that workers' voices need to be centered. We know that the building that I'm standing in now, our entire city has been built by an extraordinary labor force. And at times those workers, that labor force has been taken advantage of in major ways. And this Building Respect and Dignity Council, it helps to use those collaborations that are already in place to perhaps better enforce, to better inform, and to make sure that workers are really centered on every bit of this process. And, you know, there are more than a few instances in the past where we haven't met those ideals. There are more than a few instances where workers were taken advantage of, where those who were undocumented were sort of pushed aside, where people weren't paid not just a fair wage, but the wage that they in fact earned themselves. And by having partners from workers to developers to unions, all right now in collaboration, making sure that we're not going to tolerate the kind of abuses that workers have suffered in the past, that'll make all the difference in the world. So I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know, but this really provides a critical opportunity. And we simply can't tolerate wage theft. We cannot tolerate labor trafficking, or payroll fraud, or any abusive worker treatments that we have seen at times in Minneapolis and throughout our country. And so for us at the city, we're going to continue to monitor but also encourage and support this BDC model. And again, thank you so much for all of your efforts and coming together to find solutions like this one. We're appreciative. We're in this together, and I think that this is going to be a real ground-changing organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for your words and for your work. Take care. It doesn't feel like Attorney General Keith Ellison needs an introduction to this crowd. I met him more than 20 years ago when I called to ask if he would talk to a room full of clergy in the basement of a St. Paul Catholic church about why people of faith should care about worker justice. As you can guess, he was terrific. Keith has been a friend of working people and a champion in the fight for worker justice for his whole life as a lawyer, as a member of the Minnesota House, as the first Muslim member of the US House, and now as our Attorney General. He stands with workers and advocates for dignity and respect for workers of every color, creed, gender, and national origin. And he continues to be a witness to me and so many of what it means to live faithfully in a broken world. Keith, thanks for being with us today and for all you do.
Thanks, Rev. Good to see you, man. Looking well today. Good to see all the friends on the call. And look, the fact is that this desperately unfair economy that so many working people are trying to manage at this very moment didn't come about as an accident. It is a result of a planned effort to put together policies that would advantage some and disadvantage the vast majority. That's what we have in front of us. It's bill by bill, tax bill by tax bill, deregulation by deregulation, underfunding the mechanism of enforcing the law. All those things happening federally, statewide, have brought us to the moment we are now, which is that we're in the middle of this COVID, and the people who we rely on for dinner are the ones who we pay the least, protect the least, and treat the worst. These essential workers, essential to our lives, we treat like they're dispensable and they don't deserve dignity and respect. But this Dignity and Respect Council says, no more. Our people are going to have the dignity and respect that they deserve. Their children are going to have the dignity and respect they deserve. Their parents, they're going to be able to live where they need to live. They're going to be able to make the complaints they need to make. They're going to be able to reform and prevent worker abuses. And so this is a vitally important tool for us all. It is part of the road to a fair economy. And it's one of those essential building blocks that we got to have everywhere in this country, but let's start here to make sure that everybody can have a fair economy. So many people who have power today, they believe that rich people don't have enough money and everybody else has way too much money. They think that paying $750 in a year on your tax bill when you say you got billions is too high. And they say that the rest of us to get some help with food or lodging or healthcare, that's too much. So this is the moment we're in, and we need a movement to get back to a fair economy that's just, that's productive, and it honors the dignity of work. And this is what this is. Let me tell you this. I want to commend Jacob Fry, good friend of mine, and Melvin Carter, both of whom have said, look, we're at this municipal level. We're going to do everything we can do to set up wage theft units. And I'm going to tell you now, the wage theft unit at the Attorney General's office works with municipal leaders to try to protect the rights of workers. We started our wage theft unit over a year ago from a brilliant lawyer named Terry Gerstein. She's a great, great person. I commend her to all. And We set up our wage staff unit, and within a few days, we had way more cases than we could even do. And right now, we're overprescribed. We doubled our wage staff unit. We staffed it with twice as many people as we had before, and we're going to continue to build that wage staff unit because we believe that the work, unfortunately, is there. We want to hold people accountable, and we want to make sure that the companies that want to take people's money know that it's not a cost-free endeavor. So we are actively going after these cases, and we will continue to do so. We know that we can't be effective without your partnership. You will know about an abuse of a worker's rights far sooner than we ever will. And so I just want to say congratulations. I'm honored to be here on the call. I want to be in this fight with you, along with the mayor and Mayor Fry and Mayor Carter and all of you. Reverend Mook, Mark, thank you so much. Good to see you. Merle, good to see you. I think I see Dan McConnell out there. Are you growing a beard, Dan? It's COVID, right? Anyway, good to see everybody, and let's get going on this Building Dignity and Respect Council. Peace.
Thank you, Keith. Your presence and work in that office continues to give a boost to all of us in all the different ways we're at this work together. So thanks for being here. I want to take just a few minutes now and tell you again, Judge Laura has given us kind of a picture of how things are working in Florida, a sense of the model, right? And I want to talk a little bit again about how the model will work here. The critical characteristics of Building Dignity and Respect Standards Council are really the same, right? It's worker driven. It's resting accountability for workers at the bottom of the supply chain with those at the top. There are swift market consequences. It's built around legally binding agreements. There's independent monitoring and enforcement. In a nutshell, BDC will work like this, right? First, a developer signs an agreement with BDC to only use contractors who abide by the code of conduct, right? We call them participating contractors. Developers also agree to pay a percentage of each project into a fund that will work to swiftly resolve wage claims and the like. Secondly, the participating contractors then enroll and agree to comply with all aspects of the code of conduct, right? These contractors go through a basic orientation and a baseline audit. They will set up worker-to-worker education, which is really at the center of this model, right? Education on workers' rights, OSHA training, led by SATUL staff. They will provide handbooks and materials to workers, the complaint line, and information about how this system works. Thirdly, participating contractors then go about their business, following the wage, health, safety, work schedule, housing and transportation, and other conditions of employment set forth in the Code of Conduct. While that's going on, BDC staff are monitoring compliance, right? Receiving and responding to worker complaints, investigating violations of the code. Step 5, BDC notifies these contractors of code violations and works to create corrective action plans and complaint resolutions, right? BDC also notifies developers. Contractors then continue in non-compliance. The goal, after all, here is compliance, improved worker conditions, raising the floor in non-union construction sectors all across the region. And yet, as Judge Laura said so clearly, there are clear market consequences. In order to have access to these projects of signed developers, contractors must abide by the code of conduct, and workers must be treated properly. Workers who are building our Twin Cities deserve dignity and respect. We believe this is the right moment to establish higher standards for workers in this community. We can see all too clearly the consequences of continuing to do things the way we have always done them. It's time to put workers at the center, to recognize that any successful rebuild is going to have to yield not just new buildings, but new relationships, new practices, new dignity and respect for every worker and member of our community. We know there are many developers of high standards and accountability throughout the Twin Cities. We know developers can make choices about how they will do business, how they will build, whose interests will be considered along the way. We recognize the practices that lead to a race to the bottom, and we know that it's workers that ultimately pay the price. It's a new day. It's past time for higher standards. We call on Twin Cities developers to sit down with BDC to join us in creating a Twin Cities construction industry that builds both buildings and better lives. I turn then to another of the leaders of this community who's agreed to join us this day and is part of this partnership that leads to a better Twin Cities. Again, the other mayor of these two I spoke of earlier, right? Key driver in development, a city that is at the center of development work and of also work for better conditions and justice, right? Prior to his election as the first African-American mayor of St. Paul, also in 2017, Mayor Carter served as a St. Paul City Council member, founding board chair of the St. Paul Promise neighborhood, director of the Minnesota Office of Early Learning, executive director of the Minnesota Children's Cabinet under former Minnesota Governor Mark Dayton. He describes his work as mayor as focused on an equity agenda, and that's what we've experienced. Time and again, he's been a partner for Satul, for all of us working to build a more equitable community. Mayor Carter, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on. This is an incredible, unusual, and unprecedented moment. I keep saying I think the word of the day for 2020 is going to be both unprecedented and you're on mute. Those seem to be the two phrases that I hear more than anything else here this year. But, you know, I read about and, you know, constantly hear people talk about a community in crisis or a city in crisis. And every time I hear somebody say, we're in crisis, that feels like a vast and almost comical understatement, because we're not in crisis. We are in crises. We are in just a staggering combination of crises. We all know that we're in a pandemic. We all know that we're in an challenging economic situation, that the pandemic has claimed over 200,000 American lives, that the pandemic economy has claimed over 80,000 St. Paul jobs in our city of 315,000 people. We've seen over 80,000 unemployment claims. We see our unsheltered homeless population that in the course of the last year has increased by more than a factor of 10. Our unsheltered homeless population is more than 10 times larger than it is today. We, of course, have seen the horrible video of the murder of George Floyd and all of the unrest that happened in the aftermath that sadly ended up overshadowing, in many cases, some of the beautiful demonstrations, the beautiful gatherings, the beautiful ways in which people came together to gather and to mourn and to demand justice and a new future for our community. And we are in what I would call maybe a long overdue national reckoning on the impacts of racism and structural inequities in our community. I appreciate that introduction because equity certainly is at the core of the frame of everything that we do. But that requires a description because in the first year of our administration, when we decided not to do a fireworks show on the 4th of July, somebody walked in my office and said, "Hey, Mayor, do you want to do a fireworks show?" And I said, "Absolutely, I love the fireworks." And they said, "It costs us $100,000. And I said, "Absolutely not. What's next?" And we ended up taking that $100,000 and using it to start a legal defense fund for immigrants and refugees in our community. And the point that we're trying to make is all the decisions we make, every penny, like everything that we do has got to meet our values. It's got to advance a world frame. I say this to say that a friend of mine who's in the progressive world, who I've known for years, who I've worked with closely and have admired her work, looked at me and said, hey, but aren't fireworks, isn't that like an equity thing? Because like Black children and white children and rich children and low-income children and children in Highland Park and children on the east side can all look at the fireworks and see them equally. And it was a real educational moment, not just for her, but for me, because so often in our progressive spaces, we talk about equity, but we don't really know what it is, right? We know we want the pictures to be diverse. We know we want to feel good. We want everybody to feel good, but we don't know exactly, we can't put our finger on exactly what that means. So I actually rewind to my business school background. My undergraduate degree is in business administration. And my dean was very clear in business school on what equity meant. It meant ownership, right? And with ownership comes two things: the ability to participate in decision-making processes, which is why in our administration, everything that we do, from setting the city budget to passing big policy to naming our cabinet and administration, we do through community engagement and community outreach, because I believe that even as a young first Black mayor of the city of St. Paul, if I disappear in City Hall and make decisions by myself, that'll be more of the same. And not a path to a transformatively different future. So we have to engage people in the decision-making processes. And also, we have to find new ways for people to participate in our economy. If I own equity in a company and that company has a great quarter, then I have a great quarter too, right? We have to find new ways. We know that that's broken because right as all of our neighbors are struggling with money, all of our businesses are frustrated and challenged right now. We've seen in 2020 billionaire wealth grow. We've seen in 2020 record-breaking stock market returns. And this, we can't have equity while we have that mismatch in our economy. So we're doing a lot of things about this. I hope you've seen our guaranteed income pilot that we're launching in St. Paul. I think that's powerful. That the whole point of that is to make sure that our community members can participate in our economy, our economic gains. We raise the minimum wage. The whole point of that is making sure that as businesses make greater and greater profits, that our employees and our workforce gets a chance to participate in that. We've established, protecting workers through our Earn Sick and Safe Time ordinance. We've established municipal regulation of like project labor agreements and prevailing wages. And all of these things, the goal of all of these things is to be able to say, you know what, there's incredible prosperity, there's incredible opportunity to be found in St. Paul. You can build something, you can, operate a business, you can, buy a building, you can do all of these types of things. And when you do, the whole point of our generating this economic activity is not to send it to some trust overseas or some trust on one of the coasts, but it's to empower, to make it easier for our families, for our workers, for our community members to get ahead at the end of the month. You guys have been in this work, and I appreciate the way that you guys have led. I've appreciated the opportunities that we've had to partner with so many of you around here, around this community, as we've just kind of established this vision in City Hall in St. Paul, and as we've worked to respond to this particular moment in American and St. Paul history. These things are really important, so those of you who have stood up for us to help us establish our bridge fund to help low-income families or small businesses who are struggling, those of you who have helped us to think about just how we approach, just getting our labor standards advisory committee stood up and all of the different types of things that we have had to do in this pandemic climate. I appreciate it. I am inspired by what you're building here, coming together and saying, how do we speak up together in a louder voice than any of us can project individually. We are together teammates in this work of, like I just heard someone say, ending that race to the bottom within parts of the construction industry. And we're building out that code of conduct to help us both celebrate the folks who develop in a responsible way, in a way that's responsible to community, in a way that's responsible to the future, in a way that's responsible to our workers, while holding those bad actors accountable, because those are the folks who are tanking not just a project, not just those workers, but our whole citywide and regional economy. So thanks for your work. Thanks for the opportunity to join you today. And I just appreciate knowing that I have you all as a teammate in this work.
Thank you, Mayor. We appreciate having you on the team and appreciate the work that you're doing in the city and the ways in which we'll be able to continue to partner. Thanks again.
Without a doubt. Thank you much.
Take care. Another set of critical allies in the development of BDC is the labor movement, the voice for working people for more than a century. In particular, we could not have gotten here without the steady partnership of the carpenters, the laborers, the Minneapolis Building Trades Council. While representing thousands of union construction workers all over the Twin Cities, they also advocate tirelessly on behalf of all construction workers and have helped us imagine how to move ideas to principles that can really work. Dan McConnell is the business manager for the Minneapolis Building and Construction Trades Council, the umbrella organization for the union construction crafts. Prior to serving in this position, Dan was a member of IBEW Local 292 for more than a decade. Dan has been a leader in the building trades efforts to fight wage theft, exploitation, labor trafficking, both through their collaboration with SATUL and other allies, and through independent initiatives like the Not on My Watch initiative. Dan, thanks for all you are doing to support workers and BDC. Thanks to me, from me personally, for the partnership and the ways you've helped us begin to figure some of this stuff out. Dan McConnell.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you for that kind introduction. Unfortunately, wage theft and labor trafficking have become almost commonplace in our construction industry. As others have talked about, for years they've been getting calls from our members about many things, like children working on construction sites, immigrant workers getting seriously hurt, and instead of 911 being called and an ambulance attending to them, they're thrown in the back of a pickup truck, never to be seen again. We get complaints from workers about not being paid by the hour, but instead they've come up with a new model of production, paying them for the pieces of sheetrock they put up in a day. Sounds fine, right? But the impact of that is those workers then don't take the time to use the facilities. Instead, they're forced to, because they work in a team, right? Instead, they're forced to urinate in cans, in bottles, in buckets, or just in the corner on the floor. When we brought these concerns to the attention of the developers and contractors, they either fire those workers or penalize them for the behavior that is a result of their own criminal contracting practices. We believe construction workers deserve decent treatment. They deserve a safe working environment, and they should be able to go home to their loved ones at the end of the day. We support this initiative because it's time for developers and contractors to do the right thing. It's time for developers to insist that these abuses don't happen on their projects. It's time for contractors to agree that there must be a set of standards on how workers on their projects are treated. If you're involved in construction as a developer, as a contractor, as a financer, if you're involved in any way, we urge you to step up, sign on to these principles, and put an end to these abuses. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. And thanks again for that continued partnership, both of Dan, of the building trades, of the labor movement more broadly, again, as we continue to look for new tools and follow the lead of workers who continue to show us with great courage what it means to make a difference in the workplace. I'd like to turn over now to Veronica Mendez Moore, co-director of SATUL. Dare I say it, Veronica? You might be on mute.
I see Veronica commenting that it sounds like she might not be able to chime in.
Okay, might be a technical difficulty.
Oh, I'm here.
Oh, there she is.
There we go. Sorry about that. This is a really exciting moment. Excited to be here and be a part of this today. My name is Veronica Mendez-Moore. I'm a co-director of CETUL. And at CETUL, we have a vision of deeply developing the leadership of workers and developing their power. And in this way, we aim to move from just being in the streets protesting about what we don't want to have workers actually being at the table deciding and implementing the solutions that they develop. Workers are the experts in their own experiences and understand better than anyone what is needed in order to solve the problems that they face at work. As Merle said previously, CETUL has been bringing together construction workers for a decade, more than a decade even, to develop their leadership, to fight back to win stolen wages, to fight against labor trafficking, and to work to develop proactive solutions to these injustices. We see the launch of BDC as an incredibly powerful next step in making that sort of a shift possible that really puts workers in the driver's seat in the at the decision-making tables. So CETUL is deeply excited to continue to build our partnership with BDC and all of the work that'll come together. Thank you.
Thanks, Veronica. Again, BDC really grows out of this faithful work of listening to workers, of following their lead, of organizing. That's been CETUL's work now for a long time. And so we look forward to that continued work together. Thank you again to all of you for joining us this morning. We are nearing the end of this time together, and we will take a little time for questions, but just a few closing words. I particularly want to thank our presenters, the workers who were willing to share their stories, Judge Laura Safer Espinosa, Attorney General Keith Ellison, and Mayors Jacob Fry and Melvin Carter. I also want to say a quick word of introduction to the board of BDC, most of whom are in this webinar somewhere this morning, and whose commitment and hard work got us here. Eduardo Cardenas, Minneapolis community organizer and ally, you heard his voice on one of the videos. Merle Payne, treasurer, co-director of CETUL. Brittany Scott, secretary of the board, senior research strategist at Partners for Dignity and Rights, which is really kind of our parent, kind of the umbrella organization over this model, right? Jennifer Arnold, the director of Inquilinos Unidos por Justicia, one of our partners working in housing in South Minneapolis on kind of the other side of this, but in the midst of this partnership. Scott Nova, executive director, the Workers' Rights Consortium, and finally Sean Sellers, senior advisor, Partners for Dignity and Rights, and one of the key kind of architects and folks who really work to build out the Fair Food Standard model and has been instrumental in helping us figure it out here. Finally, a word of thanks to our financial supporters, especially the individual donors whose generosity has brought us here, has enabled the work thus far, and to the Headwaters Foundation for Justice for their support in this critical time. Should you wish to support BDC, I invite you to contribute through our website at buildingdignityandrespect.org. This concludes our formal program, but again, we do want to take time for questions. I see a couple of questions that have come in through the question and answer feature, and maybe I'll start with those. First, simply a question about how where are the details of BDC, where will they be shared, kind of these steps and how this all works. The website will be a good resource for that. There are some things there now. Other things are still in kind of final development and will be posted along the way, but we'll also make a point to post the content from today up on the website as well. So again, take a look there. A second question of how has the group of developers received the announcement of this launch? We have not, other than around specific concerns and sort of in the history of the work directly with workers around wage theft and other issues. We've had CETUL has had much engagement with developers. We in the BDC process have been in informal conversation with some developers that have frankly helped us to shape the code as it currently stands. But it really is today that we kind of issue this public call, and we'll be reaching out following today, looking for opportunities to sit down and begin the conversation with developers. Those are the two questions that have come through kind of in the Q&A feature. Are there additional questions either through that feature, or ones that we can recognize live? And I don't know exactly how to do that, but I suspect Sarah Newell, and thanks to Sarah, also at Dignity and Respect, Partners for Dignity and Rights, who's been kind of running our tech side. I see another, go ahead.
You have a number of questions in the chat function there.
Thank you. Over in the Q&A again, and then I'll bounce over to chat, and we'll hand these around too. I certainly don't need to field them all, but more specific about the market consequences for contractors that violate the code. So again, the way the model is built, developers sign an agreement with BDC that all the work done on a particular project, all the contractors on the project will abide by the code of conduct. So in some ways, the first market consequence really is just that in order to gain access to the market, you need to agree to abide by the code of conduct. Secondly, then once a contractor has done that and things are kind of rolling along on the project, if you will, again, compliance is monitored by BDC, violations of the code, paths are worked out to resolve those, right, to come back into compliance. But in a worst case scenario, in a contractor who refused to abide by the code, or whose violations of the code were so egregious, or, you know, kind of extreme safety violations, physical violence and harassment, those sorts of things, a contractor could actually be removed then from compliance, deemed to be in non-compliance, and thereby removed from the job site. So again, in terms of market consequences for contractors, that's kind of how that works. I will bounce over to the code, to the chat section here too. How can a local suburban city get involved in the project? And again, that's a little reminder, my apologies, to also say a word of thanks to those of you who've joined from municipalities. I see council members, I see Council Member Ben Whalen from Richfield, and other council members who've joined us on this call as well. But again, we hope to be in dialogue, certainly not just with the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, but also with really all the municipalities and other cities around the region, about how BDC can be a tool for them as they think about responsible contracting in the city. So again, certainly reach out to me via email or phone, go to the website, or in other ways, just send a note, and I'd love to be in that conversation. I see a question from Bert Johnson, another of our strong allies and partners from the Carpenters Union. What is the message of BDC to union construction workers already working at a good wage and benefit package? I mean, first, it is, again, thank you, right? That's one of the messages to workers and to their unions, who really have proven a care and concern for workers who are not currently in a situation where they're in a union job. This is the impact on any part of this industry, we believe, impacts the whole industry. And really to raise the floor, to eliminate kind of the egregious practices at the bottom, right, in these sectors, really is to raise all ships, if you will, is to improve conditions for all workers. We'd love to have the involvement of workers who are in union jobs now. We'd love to engage them. For developers who are already working, union, this agreement, this code of conduct specifically recognizes that, that again, working with union contractors and subcontractors really exceeds these standards already, right, is already the path we want workers to be on. And so again, recognition that that is a responsible way to work, and that this only happens through a partnership between workers who are already in sectors that are unionized and have good union jobs, but we believe this will raise the whole industry and protect all workers, many of whom even work perhaps some union jobs and some non-union jobs. Merle, I'm going to hand this over to you as well for maybe a little more in terms of this this relationship and this work around kind of union and non-union.
Yes, thank you. I would add, so when working in an industry where we see a lot of these, we see from the top down, there are some developers that are making choices to cut corners and be able to get the cheapest contracts possible so that they can line their pockets for themselves and for their financial investors. Some developers are making positive choices and are making and are establishing good middle class jobs and that are good union jobs. But there's the other developers that are coming into the market that are undermining that. And when you have these developers come in and you have the downward pressure on contractors who are willing to cut corners on the backs of the workers, then that is direct competition with the good standards of what the union jobs are. It's undermining that standard. So a part of this model, inherent into in the model itself, is workers on the ground are the eyes and the ears of making change in your workplace. Union workers on your job sites, you are the eyes and ears empowered to be standing with all of the other workers on that job site. And if you see things that seem not correct, if you see that workers are getting paid in cash under the table, if you see things like that happening, you can contact us at either at Seitul or at BDC, and we can reach out and talk with those workers so that together we can raise the boat for everyone.
Thanks, Merle. Again, a couple of more questions that have come through kind of around being a local elected official, wondering about how to engage. We know, right, that local elected officials, that mayors and city councils, folks working on city practices and codes and policies are thinking all the time on how to protect workers in their cities. Projects that perhaps are city projects, right? But also around all the jobs in the area. So again, we just really invite a partnership. I wish I had super specific answers, but we really invite conversation and a partnership with those city elected officials around how a tool like BDC might indeed be used, how it might help as cities are thinking about how to guarantee the rights and the safety and the fair treatment of workers in their cities, that we can be a partner in that work. Other questions? I think we'll take about one or two more, and then we should probably wrap up.
I think while we're waiting for questions, I appreciate seeing so many local elected officials on this call. And we would love to sit down and talk with you more about how this model works. Municipalities have enormous influence over what happens in construction in their cities through the permitting process. And there are a number of ways that we can work together to, through that permitting process, to ensure better standards in the industry. And we look forward to working with you all.
Thanks, Merle, and thanks again to all of you. I think we are at a good stopping point. Again, I'm just highly appreciative of the ways in which so many of you have been thinking about this already, and have stood ready and have reached out and are really starting to think about how can this new tool bring a higher level of accountability and finally dignity and respect to workers, and a way of thinking about this as really, again, as we talked about earlier, centering worker voices. So workers are determining the codes, are teaching one another about rights on the job, are engaged in protecting one another. And so that we're all encouraged as we see things to speak up, as we see workers who are in danger to stand with them, as we find opportunities to work together. It's how we're going to raise this industry. So again, thank you for joining us. Thanks for being a part of this launch, and we look forward to working together as we build out BDC. Take care.